Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, February 4th, 2020, and it is time to kick off our week-long celebration of film and film history with our finale episodes closing out our fifth season, starting out with our top 10 of 2019 tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. So excited to be with you and throughout the Oscar week leading up to the Oscars. And I'm here in my home in Los Angeles. I got Luke here with me to count down the top 10 with us. And I've got a couple other panelists that I'll introduce you to shortly. This is our fifth edition of the top 10. And it is our 318th total video that we've done on this channel, including vlogs, since we started on February 20th, 2015. We did 33 of those videos in 2019 alone. Here is the schedule for this, our biggest week of the year, our finale week, starting tonight with the top 10 of 2019, continuing tomorrow night with our Oscar preview in which we predict winners. We tell you what we think should win and should have been nominated in 9 different categories. And our look back 60 years at 1959, our 1959 review. We're going to look back at the Oscar categories that year as well as the year in general. So we're very excited. Nothing we do is bigger than these shows that every year that close out our season. So I'm very excited. Now, it's only appropriate that Luke should be with me tonight because our two panelists are the same two guys that reviewed the last Star Wars movie with me back in late December. So The Rise of Skywalker, that is. So let's start with introductions. Let's start with our out-of-work stuntman who lives with his family in a basement planning to con the upper class. Jim Carroll is here with us, Jeopardy champ.
You know, we have a pretty good plan now. So watch out, upper class.
Watch out, upper class. It's gonna happen. And also with us, ladies and gentlemen, a former World War I soldier who's on a mission to paint houses. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Evans is here.
I don't know if that's how I want to be identified.
Well, I'm trying to refer to some of the films that some of the bigger films that are being celebrated this year. Whether or not they come up on our top 10 remains to be seen. All right, so those are our guys, and we're going to launch right into talking about 2019 in general here, which also is known as the year that Scarlett Johansson tied shoes. That is one of the main themes of this year that I noticed. These guys didn't laugh. I thought that joke was going to go over a lot better than that. Maybe they didn't see the movies that I'm referring to. No one else is drinking, so I'm going to have Stella tonight. And Patrick was just over to watch a 1959 movie. We just watched North by Northwest. So I'm already a few in. So this is going to be my third beer here already at 6 o'clock Pacific. So it could be an interesting top 10.
I'm glad you're drinking for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. One beer for each. Stella tonight. Okay, so the next thing is we always say how many movies that we watched out of the movies that came out this year. There are 344 Academy-approved movies that were eligible for this list. And so last year I saw 112. This year was the Oscars are 3 weeks earlier than they normally are, so I didn't see as many this year. But before we get to my number, let's talk to Alex. What number did you reach out of the 344?
I got to 22 out of the films on this list, and then I saw a few other early releases of stuff that hopefully we can talk about next year.
Excellent. So he's up to 22, so almost half of his films are going to be on this list this year. Jim, what is your number this year?
I actually got to 10%, so I got to 34.
34. All right, there you go. My goal, given the shorter time frame, was to at least to break 100. I wasn't trying to break my 112 record, and I did not. I got 104 out of the 344. That's where I'm at. And so the other thing that I've got going on here, guys, is every year I try to predict what my co-panelists' number one films are going to be. So I've got index cards here, and on the back side is my guesses as to what your number one films are going to be. So as the evening goes along, we'll see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. The next question to ask you guys as we go right along is the biggest movie that we missed. In other words, the biggest movie that you wanted to see that you didn't get an opportunity to see for whatever reason. And so what's the one movie that like, oh, I wish I'd seen it in time for this list, but I ran out of time or it wasn't available or whatever. Who do I have starting? Jim, biggest movie missed.
It's super easy, and I really want to see it now. I might actually see it after we do this, which is Parasite.
Well, that is a problem. So I can reveal right now that I clearly got this wrong.
Guess what, Jonathan? I was going to say, even though I didn't see it, I think that it's going to be my #1 movie of the year.
We'll see about that, because that already that is my so much for that prediction. Usually with the predictions, I've never gotten the #1 right, but usually my predictions are always on the other person's top 10.
I think you are more right than you know. I think I'm going to watch the movie at home tonight, and I'm going to write you and say you're absolutely right.
Do it in the comments section. All right, Alex, your biggest movie missed.
Probably Ad Astra or Parasite. Both of those looked interesting.
So Parasite is not going to come up tonight. So I can tell you, Jim, I dislike the movie quite a bit. We don't always agree, so that's why I predicted you would like it. But I actually think it's well made, but I mean I have a lot of issues with it, and I didn't enjoy it at all. And I'm in the minority there, of course. So Parasite is not going to come up tonight at all, it sounds like, which leads me to my biggest movie missed, which the movie that's on the list that it's technically not available is Seberg, starring Kristen Stewart as famous actress from the 60s, Jean Seberg, 50s and 60s. She's in one of our 1959 films, The Mouse That Roared. And I really wanted to see the Kristen Stewart interpretation of that, but it's an Amazon movie that's not on Amazon yet and not in theaters, but somehow is eligible for this year, and I missed it. The other film that I really wanted to see also features Kristen Stewart, and I fell in love with Naomi Scott when I saw Aladdin, even though the movie's terrible. So I really wanted to see Charlie's Angels when it came out, but it was in and out of theaters. It's not out on video yet. It sort of fell in that through the cracks, and I missed it. Probably wouldn't have made the top 10, but Naomi Scott definitely makes my top 10. Jim, you might have seen Charlie's Angels. You've got daughters.
I do have daughters. I did not see Charlie's Angels because nobody would go with me to see Charlie's Angels.
Even the girls, they wouldn't go with you, huh?
Even my wife, whom that movie is pretty much made for, was sort of like, meh. And by the time I had a chance to see it, it was already out of the theaters.
Yeah, if I was in New York at the time, we would have gone together, and that would have not been lame for two middle-aged men to go see Charlie's Angels together.
Absolutely not.
So the next bit before we get to the actual top 10 is disclaimers. George was saying to me that, and by disclaimers, I mean sort of a general sort of sense, like sometimes some people I like to at least to say, sort of set up a disclaimer about what you might find in my top 10. Last year, I'm always saying I had a hard time making a top 10. George said that last year. At the Golden Globe party, George was saying to me that he wished he could have been on the top 10 this year instead of last year because he had a much easier time finding 10 films. And to be honest, I did too. I actually feel like this year is a better year for me. I've been complaining about not having enough films to fill the top 10 since 2016. But like 2015, that was the last good year. I found a lot more movies that I really enjoyed. However, as usual, they're not the movies that other critics lauded, and for the most part, not the movies that are nominated for awards at all. After seeing a highly acclaimed film with Devin earlier, actually it was Parasite, I can let that out of the bag. After seeing Parasite with Devin earlier and not enjoying it, I said to him that that in life and on this show it would be so much easier if I weren't me. And I shared the perspective that everyone else does, because I just don't. But I am who I am, and as I call him as I see him. So it's going to be a very unusual top 10, I think, as it is every year. Guys, do you have anything you want to preface your top 10s with before we move on? Anybody can chime in.
I will say I did have a hard time coming up with a list. In fact, a movie that I saw in 2019 that I thought was a 2019 film and I had expected to talk about tonight for performance, I was actually disappointed when I didn't see it on your list. I found out that it was actually a 2018 release.
What was the film?
It was High Life, the Claire Denis
Yes,
film.
that is not eligible for this year.
But yeah, I had a hard time coming up with the top 10.
Okay, cool. Alex.
I realized that I've actually seen 24 of the list when I just went through to see which ones I'd missed.
Look at you. You're just adding them by the minute here.
But I would say I'd be interested in having a conversation about any of those 24 films. Took me a little shuffling around, but I feel like my top 10 are films that I think I will continue to enjoy for years.
It is time to start the top 10. Very exciting. Here we go. Let's change the slide behind me to sing. There it is. Number 10 is up, kicking off our top 10 of 2019. I'm so excited. Who gets to go first here, ladies and gentlemen? Let's see. And it is Alex gets to go first. Alex, what is your number 10 film of 2019?
So I just saw this film last week, and I was really excited by it. It's called The Lighthouse with Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
As a horror film, it's a film that I refuse to watch. It's the only Oscar nominee that I've not seen because I refuse to watch it. I made the mistake of watching The Witch from the same director, and I swore I would never watch that director ever again, mainly for gore and horror reasons. I won't watch it, but glad that you liked it. I heard other people liked it as well.
Yeah, I just thought the accent work and the design and the lighting and cinematography was all very imaginative and evoked a strong intentional feeling.
I saw 104 and you saw 24. Out of your 24, there's still ones that I didn't watch. Jim, is Lighthouse one of the 34 you watched?
Guess what? The Lighthouse is my number 10 film.
Okay.
So we have some consensus.
That synergy happens a lot, particularly with the other panelists. Rarely with me, but with other panelists on the show, they usually like Devin and Ryan, I remember, had Blade Runner at number 7. Both had it at number 7 a couple years ago. So yeah, okay. Lighthouse is also number 10. They didn't copy each other's paper, ladies and gentlemen.
We did not. Well, I know. I mean, maybe this is all just leading into one huge coincidence.
Jim, what do you have to say about The Lighthouse?
I thought the presentation was interesting. I thought the performances were great. Willem Dafoe is always amazing.
I just want to point to our review of Motherless Brooklyn from episode 57.1 this past year on Willem Dafoe being always great. Just take a look at that movie before you make that statement.
Willem Dafoe is always interesting.
Accurate.
In this film, I thought he was great. I think Robert Pattinson himself is really coming into his own as an actor. Certainly with this film, he's really sort of showing his chops.
That keeps this show moving to have the same number 10.
I would just say it was a really great show about generational conflict within the self.
A movie I will never watch. So that's easy enough because what really delays these movies tends to be my commentary on not liking what the other person is, the movies the other people like. So my number 10 is every year, and every year I seem to struggle with number 10 the most. And every year I seem to make a last minute switch, and this year is no exception. I was originally thinking about a film here that I really enjoyed, though it was really flawed and hokey in places. So I checked my heart at the door and decided to go here with a film I knew was more well-made and more cerebrally engaging. So it's the only documentary on my list this year. The film is called Apollo 11. I was so impressed with this film, a doc made without any interviews, without any voiceover, no context whatsoever forced upon you, which leaves you to make your own conclusions. The result is a heart-pounding, thrilling film that puts you in the control room, at the crowd viewing station at liftoff, in the lunar capsule, and right on the surface of the moon. It's not the breathtaking imagery that makes this film special. It's the editing that gives us a well-rounded, balanced view of the mission from all vantage points. It was an education that was also exciting, so it is must-see film in schools, I think. I did feel like the music was a little too high in the mix sometimes, drowning out some of the control room chatter, but that was a minor flaw in an otherwise expertly made film. Kids, either of you see Apollo 11? I know, Alex, you see a lot of docs.
I did not.
Jim?
I didn't see Apollo 11.
All right. Number 9, moving right along. This is going quick. I like it. I like it when it's quick. The audience likes it. Everybody likes it. All right. Number 9, I think Jim's probably going to go first, and he is. Give me your number 9.
All right. My number 9 is Yesterday, a movie that I actually had no expectation of walking in. I've seen it 3 times since the movie has come out. I keep finding more and more to like about it. I don't know how much you want me to go into that.
If that's enough for you, then that's enough for me, certainly. I like to keep things moving. I knew this was going to be on your list because you recommended it to me later. And because you recommended it to me, I avoided it. It's another film that I did not see this year. The trailer looked bad to me, so I just prioritized other things. It's strange that so far, nobody's had any synergy with me in terms of watching the same movies. But you haven't seen your movies yet. Alex, have you seen Yesterday?
I have not.
So Jim, are you good? You have more you want to say about Yesterday?
No, I mean, I do recommend that you'll see it. I'm sure you'll hate it, as we often go separate ways. It's a very easy film. You know, you're not going to walk out of the theater with a momentous, life-changing thing, but it's just I really love the story of it. And I think Robert Carlyle turns up 2/3 of the way through the movie for a cameo performance that is incredible.
I had the choice between, for some reason, I sort of connect that with Blinded by the Light. I had the choice between the two. I chose Blinded by the Light, and I regret it.
It's that weird sort of thing where you have 2 movies about non-Americans finding
American music. Actually, it's British music in this case. But yeah.
Well, the Beatles and then Bruce Springsteen, but sort of these iconic rock bands.
Yeah. Alex, you're number 9.
My number 9 is, and on your behalf, I feel weird to say it, is Little Women.
Oh, right, because of Greta Gerwig and my bad history with Greta Gerwig. It's interesting. I liked Little Women. I had some major issues with it. When looking at number 10, I was considering it. Ultimately, I think it's my 4th favorite of the Best Picture nominees, which is pretty good. The scene work in that film is incredible, Alex.
As far as her big, I would say, like, sophomore film, it was a really great evolution. And I thought she developed many characters really well. I thought all the performances were great all around.
The way that the blocking and the camera sort of worked together, the actors sort of flowed in and out of frames. It was so beautifully and naturally handled, in spite of the time period. The costume design is the best of the year, which I might get to tomorrow. My main issue with it is that I do feel like, almost from an Insecure point of view, Gerwig inserted herself, directorially too often. I did not enjoy the gimmick of the letters talking to the camera kind of thing. I felt like some of the montages were a little forced and weak. So I felt like the scenes were great, but she wasn't trusting them to tell the story. It felt like she needed to like show off filmmaking every now and then. I know the novel has letters, but they don't need to be read to the camera. You know what I mean?
Normally I don't like it, but I felt like in terms of the source material and the past adaptations that I'd seen, I thought they worked within it. Normally that's something that just shuts me out of a movie immediately when it happens. I thought the visuals were entertaining enough that I forgave when letter voiceover contrasted with them too much.
To be fair, out of 104 movies, it would make my top 20. I feel confident about that. I haven't ranked it that high, but I was considering it. It was it was amongst 5 or 6 movies that I was looking at for number 10. So I, in spite of myself, I liked it a little bit. It was flawed enough to keep it off my list. Jim, have you seen Little Women? With all your Little Women, you might have.
I did, and it is on my list. Okay. I don't know if I want to segue this.
I do not, unless it's number 9. Oh, you already did your number 9.
I already did my number 9.
Jim's given away a lot of his list early on. I don't know. If you're just here for Jim's list, you might as well tune off. But my number 9 is the big surprise on this year's list. The film many of you were likely not even aware it existed. Its release was so small. One of my favorite plays overall, let alone one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, has always been Hamlet. The Mel Gibson version came up a couple times in our 1990 review. So maybe I'm a little biased in my love for this film. Hamlet given the revisionist treatment, like the way Wicked was to The Wizard of Oz. The name of the film is Ophelia, told from the perspective of Hamlet's tragic love. While the film is true to all the plot elements of the famous play, it turns it on its ear in a highly satisfying and engaging way. The result is one of the more effective feminist statements that I've seen this year, and there was a lot to choose from. Director Claire McCarthy's shot selection is mostly basic and a little overly romanticized at times, like slow motion a lot and halo lighting, etc. But it's also very detail-oriented with beautiful craft elements, production design, and especially the costume design. She has a cast of very capable actors, including Daisy Ridley in the lead, Naomi Watts, Clive Owen, and one of the best Hamlets I've seen in a long time, George McKay. They made the choice to not use the Shakespearean dialogue, which I thought was really interesting. The characters said the same things, but in Old English without the wordplay or the poetry. It was a really interesting choice that I thought worked really well. Every year a movie comes along that I hadn't heard of and didn't expect to enjoy that engages and touches me. Through the legendary story, the filmmakers found a way to show a woman finding her strength in spite of the man's world that surrounds her, while showing the pitfalls of some women who gain power and then find they have become just as greedy and power hungry as the men have been. So guys, I don't suppose anybody's seen Ophelia.
I always like a Shakespeare adaptation, so I'll definitely check it out.
It's not a true Shakespeare adaptation. You get that, right?
Yeah, no, I understand. I think she should have gone one step further and made it in Middle Danish.
Maybe. Jim, Ophelia?
I have not seen it.
I know you guys, I sent you a list of films. So outside of that list, had you even heard of it or heard of its release?
No.
All right. Diamond in the Rough.
Yeah.
For you guys. Jim, do you like Hamlet? You as a theater guy? Okay.
I mean, as a theater guy, I'm kind of required to like Hamlet. But fortunately, I actually do like Hamlet. So
I mean, I don't like Romeo and Juliet, and I grew up in the theater. I think it's one of the weaker Shakespeare plays. All right. Moving right along here, guys. This is very exciting. I think we're going fast. I like it. Number 8 is up. I assume Alex is first, but let me double check my notes here. Let's see. It is going to be Alex.
This is the film I saw for this show with JB. It's Queen and Slim, that I thought was a great on the run from the law road movie that felt like a Western meets a gangster film, but with like an activist spirit to it. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
Obviously, you should tune in to episode, I think it's 58.1. to see my thoughts on Queen and Slim. But to sum it up, I liked it but didn't love it. I felt like it was pretty heavy-handed. I would have nominated Bokeem Woodbine for Best Supporting Actor of the Year. He made my top 5 in that category. Other than that, I was mixed on Queen and Slim, I think, in the episode. But double check it for more detail to the audience. Jim, have you seen Queen and Slim? You weren't on that show with us.
I didn't see Queen and Slim.
All right, so that covers Queen and Slim, and that brings us to Jim's number 8.
My number 8, we were just talking about, was Little Women.
Okay, there you go. What do you have to respond to what Alex and I had to say about Little Women? Or has all been said?
I mean, letters to the camera didn't bother me. I didn't mind Gerwig inserting herself as a director. I really loved Saoirse Ronan. I really loved Florence Pugh. Their performances were outstanding.
Did your daughters also like the movie?
Yes, Madeline and Vic, I think, cried for about 2/3 of the movie. Vic, because I think she's seeing her daughters grow up. I thought it was really, really well done.
More crossover between Alex and Jim and not me. The cheese that stands alone. It's a pretty sad situation for me. And I will say Saoirse Ronan did make my top 5 actresses of the year. I do think it's a remarkable performance. Florence Pugh did not. I like Florence Pugh a lot. I liked her in Lady Macbeth that came out a couple years ago, and she did make my top 5 actresses that year. I'm surprised she's Oscar nominated. I thought she was fine and good, but I saw 5 better supporting actress performances this year. Sorry, Alex, what were you going to say?
Was the movie just called Lady Macbeth? What year was that adaptation done?
That was 2 years ago, I believe, and it was just called Lady Macbeth. It was not about Lady Macbeth. It was about a kept woman to some degree.
Okay.
The Lady Macbeth title is misleading. It has nothing to do with Shakespeare. It is more to do with what that name represents. But that's a particularly great performance. So it's an actor I really admire and like, and excited to see what she's got. Black Widow coming out. I'm surprised she's nominated for an Oscar. I thought Laura Dern was really great in Little Women, strangely enough. I was thinking about her performance for supporting actress, but her performance is so small. All right, we have covered Little Women quite a bit. So I'm going to move on to a very manly movie for my number 8. And it's another bit of a surprise. I watched it because it's available for free on Amazon. That sometimes accessibility determines which of the 104 movies I watched. And think All Is Lost on Ice. The film is called Arctic, starring Mads Mikkelsen. And this film made my list because I honestly couldn't find any real flaws with it. It was extremely well thought out and detailed, engaging, and exciting. Director Joe Penna does an exquisite job of knowing exactly what to shoot, what to show you, when, and how. More and more, I find directors aren't as good at that, the basic elements of storytelling. And he does it without ever feeling like he's trying to manipulate you with score or any overtly sentimental shot choices. Like, for example, what my complaints about Queen and Slim and Little Women. I was consistently impressed with how he communicated ideas visually without unnecessarily inserting himself into the narrative stylistically. I never felt confused or disengaged, and that to me is great storytelling. Like many films of this kind, All Is Lost and Castaway, the performance stands out, partially because it's a solo performance. And Mads Mikkelsen is no exception here, as you might expect. He's pretty terrific. My only real knock against the film is that there are a lot of very similar films, and this shares a lot in common with those, but that just might be the nature of the beast. I think this one is a little bit better, and it stuck with me, even though I watched it late in the year. So, guys, has anybody heard of or seen Arctic?
No.
But I enjoyed Mads Mikkelsen in Polar, which is a similar title.
Is he stranded in the Arctic in that movie?
Kind of, yeah.
While he was shooting Polar, they're just like, Mads.
While you're up there.
I wonder if there was a title change and they re-released it. Maybe it's the same movie.
What I'm talking about is like this assassin exploitation film that was done by a music video director.
This is not that. This is survival in the Arctic kind of movie. This is one of the survival movies. Like I said, All Is Lost on Ice. All right. Nobody's seen anything on my top 10 yet, so that'll keep things interesting. And let's move right along, ladies and gentlemen. This is I feel like it's moving fast. So we're clearly at number 7. I'm going to double check who's first here, and it is Mr. Jim Carroll, the Jeopardy champ. Give me your number 7.
All right. So I feel like I pretty much was fairly in sync with the Academy this year, because number 7, I went with Joker, which is a movie that I think lives on Joaquin Phoenix's performance. But I think, like Logan a few years ago, it sort of took what we expect from comic book movies and completely rewrote it and changed what we could expect from it. I'm not sure I like this movie, but it stuck with me.
I agree with that. I would say if you watch more movies, because it's in my top 20, I would say, more for being impressed by it, but not really enjoying it. I would say it's an important movie, and I do have Joaquin Phoenix's performance as the best of the year. He will win the Oscar. He should win the Oscar, as I will say tomorrow night again. It was on my top 10 for most of the year, begrudgingly, to your point. A lot troubles me about it. I mean, but part of that has to do, like we talked about, we actually came up in a sound-off. Devin's diatribe talked about it a little bit because there's a question of what is the filmmaker's responsibility. It almost started a riot in the theater I was in when I first saw it in Times Square. Whenever the upper class was injured or hurt or murdered or killed, the audience would applaud in a very uncomfortable way. I don't think that the filmmakers are responsible for that. I think it's trying to point that out. I am feeling that the movie is almost too complex and nuanced for most of its audience. For a lot of the people that have gone to see it, as successful as it was, they're not getting the point, and that's troubling to me from a society point of view. I also feel like the movie was probably over-directed. And I think about the dilapidated design and flickering lights now and then, you know what I mean? Like sort of obvious kind of choices to darken the tone and the mood that I felt were a little heavy-handed, like close-ups of his hands, and also the whole is, what's real, what's not thing, I thought was poorly handled. I had enough flaws on this movie to keep it off of my top 10. I almost wonder if you had seen twice as many movies as you had, if it would have stayed on the list.
It's number 20 out of my 24 for the year. I thought that there was a lot of nuance to it and there was a lot of craftsmanship, but I just didn't like what it had to say. It just dealt with subject matter in a way that, given my own personal history, made it like an upsetting film to watch.
I think I'm in the same boat. I was impressed with it,
but I understand not all films are for me, but it was just a film that made me uncomfortable.
That was enough to keep it off my top 10, but it's in the top 20 because I was impressed with even just trying to say some of the things it was trying to say, even if I disagree with it in some cases. It almost sounds like we're all in the same boat on that.
Weirdly enough, I think if you went to Todd Phillips and you were like, this film made me incredibly uncomfortable, he would be like, great.
Cool.
We were trying to
like, fine.
I do feel it's the best DC Comics film made in a long time.
Oh,
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Okay, I was worried it was going to come up. I was worried for a lot of hate for not liking it. I'm almost glad it's as low as it is at 7. So, Alex, I think we have to do your number 7. I sometimes you're up. 7.
Okay, so my number 7 was Ari Aster's new latest film, Midsummer. I really enjoyed that it was shot in central Sweden, where I went to college, so I enjoyed all the visuals of it. I thought it as using being in an intercultural relationship as the anthropological premise to a horror film was super interesting and well done. It even had an actor from The Good Place. It kind of felt like, if The Good Place is the good place, this is the bad place.
Referring to the television show, The Good Place.
The television show, yeah.
Obviously, you might guess, Alex, as a horror film, I did not see this movie. And I had an opportunity. It was shown in the final night of the Spirit Awards screenings, and Devin was like, let's go. And I'm like, nope, not going.
I saw it in the theater twice. I really enjoyed it.
From Jim's smile, I suspect he does not want to talk about it just yet.
I do not want to talk about it just yet.
Jim's list is is pretty much all revealed. Are you sure you guys didn't work on this ahead of time? Are you the same person?
No, I think just sometimes great minds think alike.
I'm going with that.
But how does that apply to you guys?
Well,
boom! All right, it's time for my number 7, which is pretty much the polar opposite of Joker. I've got an emotionally complex and challenging film that accomplishes many of its goals in spite of a few bumps along the way. My number 7 is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. The performances in the film are lovely by both the Oscar-nominated Tom Hanks and also in the less showy role Matthew Rhys plays. Hanks manages to avoid caricature and imitation, but fully embodies the spirit of Fred Rogers. Rhys had the more challenging role, however. He felt real and natural without any scenery chewing, just honest moments within the truth of the character. Some say the film is about forgiveness, but I say it's particularly about communication with each other and also with our own feelings. The film acknowledges that it's a message for children, but it's one that we lose sight of as adults and need to be reminded. The script is full of great storytelling ideas that I wonder if director Marielle Heller overuses now and then. The Mr. Rogers neighborhood models were a neat idea, but I think they went to that well once or twice too often. And there's a beautiful moment in the middle of the film, one of the best of the year, when an entire diner silences for a full minute of screen time. It's clear that we as an audience are also supposed to use that time to reflect and meditate, but Heller dilutes the moment toward the end of the minute when she asks Hanks to spike the camera. That shows a lack of trust for the audience that I didn't enjoy. But these are minor quibbles in an otherwise highly emotionally engaging and enjoyable film. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is my number 7, guys. At least I think you've heard of this one. Has anybody seen it?
I
I
saw
want to see it.
What's that, Alex?
Oh, I want to see it, but I have not.
Okay, Jim.
I saw it. It was very. This was one of the movies that was in the mix for my top 10. As I was watching it, I couldn't get "Won't You Be My Neighbor" out of my head. I kept cross-referencing.
That's not the film's fault.
No. It's not the film's fault. Strictly subjectively, it impacted my enjoyment of the film.
Adversely.
Knowing the real Mr. Rogers,
Jeopardy champ knows Mr. Rogers.
knowing him in the same way that I know the lady from Romper Room.
Whose name you don't even know. The robbery reference might have been too old for Alex. I'm not sure.
I think it's very local to like New York, New Jersey.
Random romper room reference, but Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood tells a different story. Like, Won't You Be My Neighbor is sort of like an overarching life, an origin story almost.
Yes, I mean it's absolutely a different movie, but I think that the documentary, even though it's 2 years old now, 3 years old,
1 year, just 1 year.
Really, it's Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood acted as a touchstone for me. So every time I saw Tom Hanks, I thought about the documentary. It was like two conflicting things.
Were they conflicting? I didn't feel like Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood said anything different than Won't You Be My Neighbor.
No. It's literally just that you see. I saw Tom Hanks and I thought of Mr. Rogers. And as good as Tom Hanks is, when you grow up with somebody, when he comes up a year ago in this documentary that I went and saw and like melted while watching this documentary, when you see somebody play that part, it is foundational to my childhood. It's just like Tom Hanks is great as Mr. Rogers. He's no Mr. Rogers. And that's the voice that's going on in the back of my head while I'm watching.
I want to have a little talk with that voice at some point. Maybe now is not the time, but I did not enjoy the documentary, but more because of the filmmaking choices. The subject matter, of course, is very emotional and effective, but I actually thought the documentary was not very strong. All right, guys, we're going to move on. Everybody good?
Yeah.
All right. Changing the slide behind me. Doing it very quickly. Number 6 is up. Woo! Number 6. I might have wooed a little too loud, guys. Sorry about that. And I think Alex is up first. And hell yeah, he is. Alex, you're number 6 of 2019.
Okay, well, this is the film I saw twice in the theater. It is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino film with Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio.
All right, so I'm going to stop you right there because I fall short once again. This is what I got for your potential numero uno. So I was right; it was on the list, but I didn't get it. I didn't get to the number 1 right, so I failed my country and my viewers once again. But I was a lot closer with you than I was with Jim, potentially. Tell me more about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I thought it was one of the most three-dimensional depictions I've seen of a Hollywood film worker in Brad Pitt's character as the stuntman freelancing as a handyman. That it showed daily life as just a freelancer in Los Angeles, even though it was in the 70s. It felt very familiar and accurate to what living and working here can feel like.
As I alluded to earlier, and audiences might expect, I hated this movie quite a bit. It is my least favorite of the 9 Oscar Best Picture nominees. It is my least favorite Quentin Tarantino film. I thought it was meandering and onanastic, quite frankly, indulgent. It was a lot of what I found to be unconnected episodes, and I don't have a problem with the revisionist history element of it. I just wasn't that interested by that point. Voiceover comes in 3/4 of the movie through. Like, there was so much sloppiness, and with every passing movie, I feel like Tarantino becomes less and less interesting because there's no one to tell him no. He's so revered that he gets to do whatever he wants, and the result is movies that are too long, too indulgent, and to me, really not interesting. And I really wanted to like this movie. It's in my wheelhouse. Classic Hollywood's involved. Anything that it had to say that were hollow. The individual scenes were interesting, but it added up to be nothing. I was really disappointed in this one. I'm sorry to say, Alex, I really didn't like it. I know Jim's seen it though.
I have.
See how much you were prepared to tell me about why you didn't like it.
I was prepared for anybody, and
this is going to be Alex's favorite. I got to tell him what time it is.
No. I mean, I have strong feelings about it, regardless of who is going to bring it up. It'll come up tomorrow night in the Oscar preview as well, probably. I'll have to say the same thing over again. Jim, you're number 6.
My number 6 is the film by Ari Aster, Midsummer.
least we're getting over the crossovers early.
I know you are opposed to horror movies. I will go out on a limb and say there's a lot of suspense in here, but I think what Ari Aster is making is a film about trauma and grief. And sure, there are upsetting scenes in it, but I don't even know if it's a horror film.
I'll tell you this much. Devin and I were standing in line to see Booksmart as the Midsummer crowd were coming out at the Spirit Awards screenings. I think it was January 23rd. The audience coming out was like, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. Don't ever make me watch that again. I mean, I can't say everyone, but it was amusing to us how strong their adverse reactions were to it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was incredibly beautiful. When you realize what's happening with the character and the follow through, it doesn't feel like Florence Pugh did anything wrong. I don't feel like you feel bad for her or for her position.
No, it just shows how relative culture is.
It's a very interesting movie. And again, Florence Pugh gave an amazing performance. I actually would have put her performance in Midsummer above Little Women.
Is it a leading performance?
Yes.
Okay, cool. We can move along quickly then, because I don't have anything more to say about Midsummer. All right, my number 6 is a movie that I did see at the Spirit Awards screenings, and I think it's a beautiful and painful tribute to the difficulties of parenthood, even if it is from the perspective of the son. Ladies and gentlemen, number 6 film is a film called Honey Boy. Normally, I might be suspicious of someone playing their own father, but Shia LaBeouf doesn't fall into any traps of impersonation or mockery. Shia's performance is so incredibly moving and powerful, thorough, and carefully executed. With the exception of the always bad Lucas Hedges, the entire cast is really strong. And Jim and I have both been on the Noah Jupe bandwagon since Suburbicon, and this film only cements his status as the best child actor working right now. The directing choices felt consistently right without ever feeling like the director was showing her hand at any point. The scene work was outstanding. At the end of the film, it got a little heavy-handed, as if she and Shia worried they weren't getting their point across. That was disappointing, but a small blip on an otherwise effective and memorable and touching movie. Guys, I don't suppose anybody's seen Honey Boy.
You know, when you asked me what was the film that I most regretted, and I said Parasite, Honey Boy is my number 2 film.
Are we going to have a top 10 films that we wish we'd seen? Is that
Kind of.
All right. Number 5, we're in the top 5 now, everybody. Oh my gosh, we're halfway through. Yeah. Feeling so excited. I'm jazzed and I'm drinking beer. I'm with my buddies here. This is just too good to be true. Top 5 films of 2019. And to mix things up, because I've been alternating all day, I always switch it up at number 5. And so I'm going to start with Alex again. You're number 5.
My number 5 is a film that was produced by Amazon and made by a famous British filmmaker called Peterloo, about a working class uprising in Manchester, England in the post-Napoleonic era in Britain.
I will surprise you to say I did see Peterloo, and I liked it a great deal. It might make a top 20, maybe 25.
It was very long, but I enjoyed it a lot, and this is like the type of film that I would love to be a part of. And anytime I get to work on something with like that level of craftsmanship all around it, it feels like the creativity is really spread around. That's always very inspiring as a technician and an artist.
I'm really glad you brought it up. Mike Leigh is a great, great filmmaker. The actors thrive in the scenes that he stages. They unfold very naturally, often with slight hints of satire that never become overwhelming. And that's overall his career, but also for this film. It's also one of the better looking films I've seen this year. The production design is appropriately grimy. The lighting is gorgeous without ever feeling staged. There's some other cinematography that I might talk about later that does feel a little bit staged. The script is so thoroughly researched, but I do feel like it gets bogged down in awfully long scenes of rhetoric. So I was less worried about the overall 3 hours of screen time, Alex, than I was about individual scenes felt like they were long and losing the point in all the long speeches, which were a part of it, but I feel like that could have been condensed.
What I took out of it was kind of like what you were saying about the Apollo 11 documentary. This felt like a film that you might watch in English or history class in middle school or high school. And I think some of those speeches, if you just read them on the page in a textbook, the real circumstances of them and the intensity of those conflicts in history don't always come through. So I found it to be like a very valuable dramatic document.
I agree with that. And it was not something that it was not a historical event that I was even aware of. So that was interesting. The actual event in 2 hours and 40 minutes or something the movie is, the actual events take up 15 minutes of that time. Yeah. And I wondered, I thought of another movie director Paul Greengrass called Bloody Sunday that I feel like handled something like that a little similarly by condensing the time frame.
It kind of reminded me of Ken Loach's work too.
Scope was a little too broad for this movie for its own good, because I feel like it could have been really effective if it was a little leaner and meaner. Alex, sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say it kind of reminded me of the filmmaking of like if Ken Loach had a giant budget.
Yeah, Mike Lee doesn't have a giant budget that much, but he did here, and I'm surprised that.
This film, I think Jeff Bezos was publicly angry about it.
Why?
Because he felt like it wasn't profitable and nobody liked it.
It's a harder movie to swallow. I do have it as my second best cinematography of the year, though.
I also think when you make something free on Amazon Prime, the way the audience interacts with it is different than the way people interact with a film that's only in a theater. And so putting the same metric judgment on its engagement in terms of determining its value as a piece of art, I think can get confusing in this age of shifting platforms.
I think the main concern for Amazon is that the critics didn't respond to it or didn't mention it, and I think if the critics had responded, the audiences would have followed. That's sort of
the Amazon marketplace. I feel like for independent filmmakers right now is that it is a place where you don't need to have mainstream critics like you in order for an audience to be able to watch your work.
Not for them to be able to rewatch it, but for them to seek it out, because most people have not heard of this movie. But if the critics were putting it on top 10 lists and was nominated for awards and things like that, then they would seek it out the way they did the other Amazon films or Netflix films like Dolomite. A
lot of that comes down to a marketing budget.
For sure. I'm not justifying Jeff Bezos' concerns. I feel like this film should have been seen more. I do feel like it should have been tighter and a little more focused.
Sure. I think 45 minutes could have been edited out.
Yeah. Jim, it's free on Amazon. You might have seen it.
I haven't seen it.
It's a dense and intense, emotional, historic epic. It's the type of movie I like.
It's imagine Mike Lee as an epic. All the little scenes feel like they could have been pulled from Topsy Turvy or Secrets and Lies, in the way that they interact with themselves, but then on a broader scale with great costume design, great production design, and great cinematography. Jim, we have to do your number 5 still, right?
Yeah. My number 5 is Marriage Story.
I thought about putting that as your number 1. I went with Parasite instead, but Marriage Story.
I recently hit 20 years, Vic and I. It is, in a way, a horrible movie to watch with your partner. What I think I liked about it so much was that there are so many moments in that movie where I could have said, oh yeah, well, that was us, or that could have been us. And then going through the movie and saying, well, if this happened, we can never let ourselves do that. I will say Noah Baumbach wrote a very biased movie for him. This is definitely his story. And I think the way that you view the characters is all very much how he felt about him. If you don't hate Laura Dern at some point in that movie, it's because you're fighting against what Noah Baumbach wants you to see. He's skewing every relationship and lensing it through that. That being said, after that movie, my wife and I sat down and talked about it for about an hour. And I can't think of another movie that put me through a ringer in quite that way.
And I can't think about anything else that would make you talk to Vic for an hour consecutively.
Nothing.
This is a good movie. And it was, if I was considering this as well for number 10, it's probably landed at number 12 if I went back that far in terms. It's my second favorite of the Best Picture nominees, right ahead of Joker. So it reminded me of Kramer versus Kramer, and perhaps less obviously Revolutionary Road. The main reason I liked it, I think the performances are outstanding, and I've railed against Adam Driver for years. I think we both have, Jim. I actually liked him here. I didn't really see as many false moments. He seemed to be really effectively communicating all the conflicting emotions that the character had. At the screening I went to, Noah Baumbach did a Q&A, and he talked about reverse engineering some of those things. It seems like he engineered the character to Adam Driver's strengths. Like Adam Driver was involved from the beginning, from the script stage. So, take that with a grain of salt, I suppose. But my main issue with the movie and what kept it off my list and bothered me is what you hinted at some degree, is that the narrow perspective. And that's fine because Kramer versus Kramer is also narrow perspective, but it set itself up to be a 50-50 kind of perspective. And then it switched midway through the movie and never returned to Scarlett Johansson's perspective. And I felt robbed by that. And I felt like it did feel unfairly skewed. And I I felt the bias, and it felt like an uneven. It felt uneven, and it hurt the movie to me.
Yeah, I will say I think if you could say anything, the other drawback to Marriage Story is that I think you could subtitle this movie "A Completely Preventable Tragedy."
There's a lot of movies I feel that way about, but yeah,
there's so much in this where they're like, if only they had, if only they obviously, the movie takes great pains to show that they love each other and still care very much about each other. If one would just give a little bit or open up this conversation, they could change it. And I think it does too good a job at showing how much they are still willing to go out to look out for one another and to protect each other in those times. And
now, having seen the movie, I don't know how you didn't understand the Scarlett Johansson tying shoes joke. But anyway, Alex, have you seen Marriage Story?
I have not. I was going to say, in response to your commentary, though, we all watch films from our singular individual perspectives to begin with.
Alex, I think you need to see the movie. It sets itself up to be this telling the tale from both perspectives, and about 2/3 of the way through, maybe 60%, it veers in one direction. Once you set up that structure, I feel
Isn't
like
that what a relationship ending can feel like, though?
No, the relationship ends from the beginning, and we're seeing both sides of the relationship ending, and then we're just seeing one side.
Oh,
My main complaint is about story structure. I'm just talking about it from a narrative screenwriting structure.
you're watching sort of the death and fallout of the relationship. I think Noah Baumbach is sort of quirky. He's got sort of this Wes Anderson light feel, so that even his very dramatic scenes still have sort of a lyricism. Even the worst fight scenes in Marriage Story still, I think, feel a little bit lighter than reality. Like,
Okay. For your number 5 film, you're complaining about it more than I am.
I like that about Noah Baumbach.
Oh, okay. I think the scene work is great. Like,
Yeah,
and again,
absolutely.
great movies and the great directors. The actual, like, the way the camera and blocking and actors work within each other is really outstanding. There's a lot of jokes, and maybe that's your issue. It didn't bother me so much. It felt smart, a lot of the jokes. I will say this, potentially controversial. I think Squid and the Whale is a better movie.
Oh, they're so deeply personal to Noah Baumbach.
Yeah, Jim's in my feature Homecoming, so we both worked with Josh Hamilton, who shared a building with Noah Baumbach for years. Did you ever hear Josh tell the story of watching Squid and the Whale with Noah's parents for the first time?
Oh,
It's a funny story. So that's a good way to end our Noah Baumbach discussion this evening with that little nugget.
offline, you're going to tell me that story, though.
Well, I mean, he just talked about it being really uncomfortable, as you might imagine. Okay, so I think we did both number 5s, right? I'm ready for my number 5.
yep.
Okay, I was excited for this film, even though I knew my potential for disappointment was very high. And after all, a sequel to a classic is a tall order. And guys, I'm going to shock you. You might argue that this is a horror movie, and I watched it anyway, and it's my number 5. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sleep is my number 5, and I feel like it believably played within the world of The Shining without ever copying it directly. This is its own film, and I was compelled and interested the whole time. It was a far more engaging story than I had anticipated. The script and director did a good job of making the complicated story very clean. We always basically knew where we were in space and time. The musical score is like a microcosm of the film, a nice blend of original material and tones from the old film. I wish the directions sometimes were more Kubrickian, but it did attempt that on occasion, especially when we got back to the Overbrook Hotel, and that was very successful. The performances were all on point, including the young Kylie Curran, and especially a tour de force from Rebecca Ferguson, a very complete and original villain. Her mix of arrogance and desperation, as well as her maternal sense of responsibility for her gang, were all clear, believable, and evocative. Whereas The Shining felt like it was ultimately about heredity versus environment, this felt more to me about substance addiction, how Danny's need to drink paralleled that of Rose's need for steam, and how both would roll over whomever they could to get their respective fixes, all to dull the pain of life and death. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sleep is my number 5. Sounds like a movie Jim would watch.
It's a movie that I wanted to see, and again, it was out of the theaters before I had a chance to see it.
Really? I thought it was in theaters for a little bit.
Not in Westchester County.
I saw this trailer, and I got into a discussion about the fact that I have never seen The Shining, specifically because I don't think the treatment of Hitchcock to Duvall on that set was okay. Kubrick, yeah. Same mentality.
Wow. We just got to dig a Hitchcock in unnecessarily. He didn't even do anything.
I mean, he did.
I mean,
To the
really
bird. Yeah,
talking.
to be Hedren and the birds.
Yeah, just, I feel like all of us have worked for really unreasonable bosses that compromise our safety. And
Sure.
knowing that that's the kind of person that made that movie didn't make me want to support it. And so kept me from being interested in this sequel.
And to be fair, yes, okay, you didn't want to support The Shining, and as a result, all the very nice people that worked on Dr. Sleep don't get their movie watched because of the sins of the father, as it were.
If any of my friends or one of the listeners worked on the film and they want me to watch it, and so I can talk to them about their experience working on it and telling me that it was an okay set, I'm happy to watch it. Just somebody from below the line, give me a heads up. Let me know how it was.
Below the line only, though. He will not listen to Rebecca Ferguson or Matt Flanagan about their experience.
Absolutely not.
All right, so that's my number 5, and Jim hasn't seen it, so we can move right along here, guys. I'm going to knock some things over. Number 4. Top 4 now. Here we go, and I assume it's going to be Jim up next, and it is. Jim, you're number 4.
This is actually a movie I only saw this past week, and I was so happy that I saw it. It was one that I wanted to see, The Farewell with Awkwafina. I absolutely love this movie. I didn't really know what to expect going in. A great story, a really original sort of out of left field idea of a story, which I think is actually what really happened in the director's family. I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing in China.
The film certainly sets it up as that.
Yes, coming at it from an American viewpoint of like that is horrifying, and then slowly seeing why they're doing it is incredible.
I'm glad you brought up The Farewell. Not because I liked it. I didn't. But
Sorry.
I wanted to get Alex's reaction. I assume Alex hasn't seen it, because otherwise we would have talked about it. Alex,
I haven't, but I've seen some interviews with Awkwafina about it. It sounds like an interesting film.
do you know who shot The Farewell?
Who?
Anna.
Oh.
Yeah. The DP, Alex and I, on the set, Alex and I met. The DP was this Anna Francesca Solano, and she shot The Farewell. I ended on better terms with her, but I mean, Alex, I know, has some thoughts about her style and her approach.
I think she's a brilliant artist and a wonderful person. I'll say that first. You were asking for the result rather than including us in the active process. Now that I see what you're trying to get at, I would have understood way more from the beginning.
So there's communication issues, and I mean, like,
style. Now that I know that she shot The Farewell, it makes me even more interested to see it.
I don't love the cinematography. I like some of the framing, but I thought the lighting was a little flat. But I didn't dislike I thought The Farewell was okay. My main issue with The Farewell is I think Awkwafina is terrible. She's not believable at all.
I loved Awkwafina in the movie. I thought she was great.
She's not creating a three-dimensional character at all. I think she was actually very bad. I like the grandmother quite a bit, a lot of the other actors, but I thought she was a cold sore on the movie that really brought it down for me. I can't believe she won the Golden Globe. I actually call it a bad performance. Not real at all, just jokey and hokey.
I liked her in other things. I really didn't like Crazy Rich Asians, but I thought she brought some humor to it that made me enjoy the film more.
She brings humor, but that's what she is. So I didn't feel any depth of character there at all. And so that's my main issue with the movie. I liked a lot of other elements to it. Thought it was fine. I wouldn't call it great at all. I didn't like it that much. But you knew we were going to disagree at some point, Jim.
I know.
Alex, you're number 4, I think, right?
So my number 4 is a World War I epic about one of my favorite authors called Tolkien. I thought this was a really cool film made by a Finnish filmmaker. It's kind of a love letter to his own language group, because it's the inspiration for Elvish. It was also one of the first films put out by Legion M, the new fan and artist-owned media co-op thing that Kevin Smith's been getting started. I thought it captured the feeling of World War I trenches really stylistically, while at the same time not being distracting, enough to make you feel like you were in the period. And I thought the way they built the relationship between Tolkien and his family and his friends was told in a very respectful and engaging way.
It is something you mentioned earlier in the year, so I had a feeling it might be on here. So I specifically waited to watch it until just a few days ago. So it's fresh in my mind. I was disappointed. I was excited about it and then disappointed by it, because I just feel like structurally, I felt like it was two different stories, the love story and the TCBS story, this little fellowship of classmates. But then I feel like it sort of got muddled between the two. I mean, the World War One part was barely part of it, and it felt like it should have been more if it were about the inspiration for The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I thought that's where it was going. Ultimately, script-wise, it felt disjointed. It felt like it had too much, it was trying to juggle, and so everything felt underserved to me. I like the performances, though, some of the cinematography, but ultimately I was a little disappointed by the film, Alex. I'm sorry.
For me with biopics, which is a lot of what I like to write as well, if I feel like you've captured your subject well or in an interesting way, it engages me, and I'm less worried about convention.
To me, the more I love elements of Chaplin. That's a famous example of a biopic that tried to bite off more than it can chew. And because when you put it all together, it everything gets underserved. But I wanted to see more about this. I want more about that, and that's almost how I feel about Tolkien. A good example, it doesn't make my top 10, but I can talk about Judy being like a very focused part of what Judy Garland was going through at a specific week, or My Week with Marilyn, which we reviewed in the show not too long ago. It focuses a little more, and in that sense is a little more.
Well, I think those are two different kinds of films. One is kind of like a reconstructionist documentary, and the other is like a biographical tone poem. And Tolkien's more of a biographical tone poem.
Okay. I don't suppose you've seen it, Jim?
I have not seen it.
For a while, I had a feeling you were going to put Tolkien at number 1, and I was ready to do that, but I switched to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at the last minute. So, my number 4 is the best film I saw at the Spirit Awards screenings this year, which I go to every January. It's called The Mustang, and it's a life-affirming piece about rehabilitation and second chances for people and horses. Also, it's about overcoming one's demons, those that might especially lead to rage. There's a scene in which prison inmates are asked the time difference between the thought to commit their crime and the actual crime. It's a powerful scene, one of many in the film. Back in 2017, Jim and I reviewed a film called Rust and Bone, which featured Matthias Schoenaerts as a very unlikable tough guy character. You remember that, Jim?
I do. I don't think you'll ever let me forget about Rust
Oh, no way. Well, basically, he's back and he plays pretty much the same character here. I think he's terrific. And although I know that Jim disagrees, in general, the film is really well shot. It's a great pace, good shot selection. All the elements were on tone. And similar to Honey Boy, my only issue is it got a little overly sentimental at the end. I could have done without the last coda scene, but by that time I was already hooked. This movie had a classic kind of feel to it, while most never feeling pandering or cheesy. For the most part, it earned all its emotion. Guys, The Mustang is my number 4 film of 2019. Has anybody seen it?
If not.
No.
Okay. Moving. Has anybody heard of it?
No.
All right. So more to add to their list of fun stuff to watch for the future. And we're so close here. Top 3 films of 2019. Can you guys feel it?
I can feel it. Woo.
They can feel it. Look how excited they are to reveal their top 3.
Woo.
Woo. Alex, you get to go first. Now you're number 3.
My number 3 film is Jojo Rabbit, which I thought was a great film from Taika Waititi. It was a cool evolution after having seen What We Do in the Shadows and Thor Ragnarok to see this as the next big film that he does. It kind of takes what it must have felt like to be a little kid in 30s Germany when everything on the news is telling you to worship Hitler like a superhero, and how learning to have your own mind and like figuring out what's right and wrong and what's important for yourself through the mother-son relationship, I thought was really well executed. And I would say I think Scarlett Johansson has one of the top 3 performances of the year.
I take notes after every movie. Not every movie that I watch, but every movie during the rush to watch all the movies in January leading up to tonight. And my first sentence in my notes is, this is another one I'm going to get hated for. I couldn't get behind this one, and I can see why people would love it. But the tone actually was off-putting to me. And I think people like the tone because it's unique, and I appreciate that. But I didn't enjoy it. It didn't make me more interested or engaged. I was uncomfortable, and I never settled into it. And it was a barrier for me. What appeals to people in terms of the uniqueness was actually a barrier for me. I also feel like when it was humorous, it was too broad, and the serious moments too serious. So tonally, it was just really awkward. I do like what you said about Scarlett Johansson, I have her as among my top 5 supporting actresses of the year. She is the heart of the movie, and she's the only actor to me that really managed to get a real sense of the balance between the humor and grace and the absurdity and also the pathos without going too far. She embodies the balance that I was looking for from the rest of the movie. It was a weird experience for me. It's my 8th favorite of the 9 Best Picture nominees, just ahead of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I was pretty uncomfortable with it, and I understand I'm in the minority, and I understand why other people would like it. It's just not for me. I get the message, particularly the message about propaganda, the concept of national propaganda, and how we have to be vigilant on that front. I just, and to be fair, full disclosure, I'm sort of lukewarm on Thor Ragnarok. I didn't really like Flight of the Conchords. I just didn't get it. I didn't find it funny. So I just feel like that sense of humor that's so unique, I appreciate. It's like so different. It doesn't, I mean, what we see in the shadows, I didn't laugh. I was just like, it was mildly amusing.
Very particularly Kiwi, which resonates with me, and I think it's funny.
Yeah, I just don't. So, I mean, like, I appreciate that this one is particularly personable, subjective. It's not for me. I worry that it's like Joker. Some people might not get the message, like they might get lost in the jokes. You obviously get it. You've talked about it. I'm worried that some people won't get it, and that disappoints me. But Jim, have you seen Jojo Rabbit?
I did. It's fought back and forth in the 8, 9, 10 slot. I sort of see both sides of what you're saying. Scarlett Johansson was amazing. I really did like it. I'm going more towards Alex's side, but I think, Jonathan, you raised very valid points. I also worry about you that you didn't like Thor Ragnarok and that you didn't laugh at what we do in the shadows.
You don't care about New Doug?
Say that again?
New Doug is what Taika Waititi's character refers to Thor as in Thor.
Oh, right. No, I remember that. Yeah, it was like cute, but it just felt weird in the middle of a Thor movie. Like, I don't know. It's the whole thing, his whole thing that he does. I want to like it, but I'm like, I'm not. I
think he makes stories that make you feel like this is someone like sitting down and telling you a story. They feel like a real authorship to them.
They're definitely unique. Probably the most unique voice since Wes Anderson, who I don't love all his films either, but I did love Moonrise Kingdom. Jim, you're number 3.
Hey, number 3 is 1917. When Alex started talking about the World War I film, I was like, oh, are we going to do this again?
There's nothing wrong with having a little crossover with Alex.
Good taste.
I thought that movie was absolutely beautiful in times, beautiful and horrible.
Which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is the same way he describes me.
That is very accurate. Very accurate.
I prefer great and terrible.
Is that why he stands behind the curtain so much? No? All right. Wizard of Oz reference?
I was trying to sync with his joke. I'm not even
Mine, I own it. There's something about shooting a movie in real time as they're walking through the trenches to get the scale of that movie. There is no cut. At some point, you're like, Jesus, they made all of this. It becomes incredible. Props, of course, for Roger Deakins, but every chapter is so clearly delineated. You know exactly when you're in this new scene and that this new part is happening, even though there isn't a cut. It's incredible. A straight technical achievement.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm going to segue here because my number 3 is also 1917.
Yay!
Last year, I had 2 Best Picture nominees on my top 10, Black Panther at 8, Green Book at 7. This year, this is the only Best Picture nominee to make my top 10, but it's all the way up here at number 3. And the one word that immediately comes to mind when describing 1917, immersive, more so than many films that I've seen in a long time. Some have complained that that aspect of it made them feel like it's a video game, but if a video game puts you in the trenches, pun intended, then that's a noble thing to replicate. It accomplished its goal of making you a part of the mission. I was even impressed with the screenplay because in a movie like this, there's a temptation to marginalize character development, but this film makes efforts along those lines and it's just enough without ever feeling like character exposition is being forced down your throat. For the second time tonight, I'm going to single out George McKay. He was overlooked because it's not a showy role, but let's not underestimate the difficulty of doing all that emotion and physicality in a single take. That requires a full investment into the character and a thorough understanding of him. I think the performance is a major achievement. I've been critical of Thomas Newman's scores recently, but this one soars. His best work since another Sam Mendes collaboration, American Beauty, 20 years ago. My primary, albeit small, complaint about the film is that occasionally, not very often, but once in a while, I felt the blocking and lighting were a little staged in order to make the single take work in an elegant and beautiful way. There were the times when they embraced the muck and the ugliness and the awkwardness, and I wish they'd maintained that throughout. Still, it was one of the best movie experiences I've had in a theater in a long, long time, 1917, and it sounds like Alex hasn't seen it.
I have not.
Also, my number 3, Jim, do you have more you want to add?
No, I completely agree with pretty much everything that you've said. I mean, and I loved George McKay in it. I agree. I thought he gave an amazing performance. You know, one of the strengths and weaknesses why it didn't get to the 2 or 1 spot for me is that it's such the plot itself is so simple. I think it works to its benefit in that it's basically like, here's some papers, deliver them, go, start movie.
But I wish more films would be that efficient.
There's no real twisty parts along the way. If it's this one thing that I can quibble about, it's that the plot itself was so light. It had to be for this to work. It's one of those things where I don't know how you could have made that any better. I love the character development that we got. I love the callbacks, like with the cherry trees. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you about the score. In fact, this movie and the next movie, my number 2, I thought the scores for them were my favorite of the year and really helped the movie along.
Actually, as much as I complain about Joker, actually Joker is my number 1 score of the year. And I think it's actually going to win, but this score is pretty special as well. It's funny, Jim, we went from the significant disagreement on The Farewell straight to a significant agreement on 1917. So that's kind of funny that, from one spot to the other, there's such vast difference. All right, guys, moving on. Oh my gosh. This is a big one. We're at number 2 already. This is just too exciting for words. All right, number 2, Jim, you are first.
My number 2 is Last Black Man in San Francisco. Alex used the term tone poem. That is the perfect way to describe this film. You're sort of like unraveling this thread of where the movie is going. And when it finally gets there, this powerhouse performance. And hold on one second, because I want to get his name.
You talking about Jonathan Majors?
Jonathan Majors. Yes, Jonathan Majors is absolutely incredible. And I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else. He should have been nominated. That last sequence with the play is one of the best moments.
He is nominated for Independent Spirit Award, by the way.
He should be. And he should be nominated for the Oscars without any hesitation.
You only saw 34 movies. I mean, I actually have him as 6 on the Best Supporting Actor list.
Of the movies that I saw.
No, I understand that. But you were so emphatic. I'm just like, slow your roll here. You got to see Aldous Hodge and Clemency before you start handing awards out to Jonathan Majors. So I like this movie a lot, Jim. I was really impressed with the quirky tone it establishes early on and maintains throughout the film. It was an engaging and quite an accomplishment, I thought. For me, the script and the film go off the rails in the 3rd act, and it's the play, and it builds up to the play, and I actually found the execution of the play kind of a disappointment. I couldn't get that bad taste out of my mouth for the rest of the movie. Some of the shots were nice, but every once in a while there was something strange that really bumped for me in terms of shot selection. At one point there's a POV shot that sort of jumps off a cliff into another that had nothing to do with the rest of the movie. A couple times I was trying to understand the script and camera choices, but it's a net positive. Ultimately, I feel like this film could have been better. I liked it. It had some unfulfilled potential for me. It might make a top 20, top 25 for me, maybe. I would describe it as a good movie. There was enough quibbles to where it just missed. And as far as Jonathan Majors was concerned, Jonathan Majors creates a really interesting character and support. He shows some range while imitating other characters, but ultimately I decided that some of the other performances of the year I was thinking about were a little more in-depth. With that said, I'm really interested to see Jonathan Majors again and also the filmmaking team. There's a lot of potential here. Maybe a foul tip, I might call this movie.
I see where you're going with quibbles. I was actually okay. The flaws of this movie actually endeared it to me more. And there were small, really interesting choices that I loved. One of my favorite is when they're walking along the sidewalk and you see sort of the community pass by in pairs. It dips into their conversations a little bit and away from the main characters into the passing lives of these people for only the 3 or 4 seconds that they're on screen to show you that there is so much more life happening around them and that everybody has their own little story in this moment. And it happens 1 or 2 times in the movie where you see sort of this expanded view of this is the rest of this community. This, again, the score I thought was propellant and really lifted the movie up.
I have this score as my number 5 top score of the year. It definitely is also on my list. Alex, have you seen Black Man in San Francisco?
No, I saw the trailer and the poster, and they both looked interesting. So from hearing you guys talk about it, I feel like it's worth checking out.
What was interesting about the poster? Wasn't it just two guys looking up?
I don't remember. I just remember seeing it outside the same theater where I saw the trailer. I think it sounds like a film worth checking out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good movie. Like I said, there's a handful I enjoyed more. Alex, you're number 2.
My number 2, I just watched this morning. Harriet, the Harriet Tubman biopic that I thought showcased the action and built the emotional relationships and had an incredible lead performance in it. And really well researched script that I think had some moments that were pretty expository, but in a way that if you had a hungover teacher in high school and they showed this instead of going through their lesson plan, it wouldn't be so bad. I
have very similar problems with Harriet that I do with Tolkien, actually. In that sense, it's a very Alexy movie. I wish it had been stronger for me. It's very slick and polished, but also very over the top, schmaltzy, and overly sentimental. I feel like it features the worst qualities of the Hollywood biopic, even though I suspect it's much lower budget than a lot of the other ones. It probably covers too much ground.
Like the production level of a TV movie.
I disagree. I feel like the shot selection was a little cheesy at times. And the score added to that tone that I didn't like. It was heightened. The cinematography was maybe a little too lush for my taste. The performance style was a little heightened. She'd probably be my 7th favorite leading actress of the year. It's good, but I felt like there was so much better. I feel like it canonized its subject a little too much. I feel like biopics are more interesting to me when they show their subjects as a little more three-dimensional. Flaws and All. My Left Foot, I think, is a really good example. The lack of dimension from the screenplay robs us of the opportunity to identify with Harriet. She's portrayed almost as a deity, and that's not terribly interesting to me. There's a point when they bring in Nina Simone in anachronistic fashion that really bumped for me. There's a ton of bumps for me that left this movie cold, and I wanted to like it. I agree with the point about the well-researched. That's not enough for me in terms of a script.
I found it very ambitious for its budget. From what I could tell of the resources they had from my experience, it seemed like they utilized them in a way to really create something that was a sum greater than the ingredients.
Cool. Jim, have you seen Harriet?
I have not.
Okay, so there's no tiebreaker here. We're on Alex and I on the opposite sides of this one. But Devin and I saw it together, Alex. Although we didn't talk about whether he liked it or not, we both sort of suggested that it was an Alexy movie.
It is, yeah.
All right, so my number 2. I'm going to shock you guys. Your pants are going to be shocked off, so tighten your belts, guys. As I just mentioned a little bit ago, I mentioned how Black Panther made my top 10 of last year at number 8. Well, Marvel Studios strikes again, this time with a feminist message. My number 2 film, Captain Marvel, is my number 2 film. And I actually love this movie, warts and all. I wasn't sure about the tone and story early on. It felt overly burdened with the origin story element, and I felt a little confused and frustrated. But then about halfway through, they meet up with Danvers' friend, as played by Lashana Lynch. And after that, everything came together and the film flew. And it made the first half of the movie make so much more sense. I liked it so much. I actually rewatched it on Disney Plus, and I never rewatched movies within a 12-month period. And I realized how important Lashana Lynch's performance was to the movie. She's so grounded. She brings the movie back down to earth, quite literally to some degree. And from the point she gets involved, the sci-fi starts to fall away, and the depth of the film starts to reveal itself, making this much more than a superhero movie. As fans of the show may have seen, I tend to give extra points for films that manage to be simultaneously entertaining and important, and this film qualifies. Watching this movie and its message about the potential for women and girls who don't have to be hamstrung by the needs and desires of a male-dominated society, I couldn't help but feel hope for the next generation, because these are the movies that they're watching. They're seeing these films and learning these messages from a young age, and I have a feeling and a hope that will play into the building of the future of our society. So as fun as Captain Marvel is, to me, it's very relevant, very important, and I walked out of the theater really excited, really happy. I think it's a great movie. Jim.
I'm so proud of you.
Why is that?
Yes, Captain Marvel was a great movie. And again, if not in the top 15, then the top 20. I agree with you and pretty much everything that you've said. I thought it was a wonderful movie.
Alex.
It's my number 15. I really enjoyed it. I thought Brie Larson was really well cast. I've always enjoyed the Captain Marvel comic books, and I've really followed the reimagining of the character of Miss Marvel as a different, younger character now. So I really enjoyed the film, thought it captured the mood and spirit of those comics and the different iterations of the character well. Yeah, just some of the rules of the superpower stuff got a little out there, but I mean that's just the nature of a comic book or like superhero or mythological story.
I mean, I bought it as having not been familiar with the comic books. I bought it like it seemed to work without having pretext. Like,
I think if you take comic book films as mythology, then it all worked.
Good. I wasn't as hated as I thought I was going to be for that particular thing. And so, can I get, ladies and gentlemen, can we get a drum roll here because the time is coming? It's weak, but I'll take it. Number 1, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Part of the tradition is to go over previous number 1s historically, so just bear with me as I go through these. In 2015, J Money had The Forbidden Room as his number 1. Davey Joe had Creed. I had Trumbo. 2016, J Money had Arrival. Davey had Silence, which was my number 2 film of that year, and I had Christine. 2017, Ryan had 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Devin had Call Me By Your Name, and I had The Foreigner. And last year, George had Black Klansman. James had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was also Jim's number 1 film of 2018. And I had the film Widows as my number 1 film of 2018. So that catches us up. So now, without further ado, our number 1 film. Alex, your number 1 film of 2019.
It was Alma Harrell's film Honey Boy.
Honey Boy, which was my number 6 film of 2019.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating dissection of masculinity and mental health and material existence based on popularity. If people don't stop liking you within a capitalist society, then you can starve to death. And what it's like to grow up with that fear.
How did you feel about my comments about it being about difficulties and challenges of parenthood?
I think that's very true.
It's almost the opposite of Noah Baumbach's approach to Marriage Story, I think, in the sense that it's something that could have been very biased, and it felt very loving but honest, like critical and loving at the same time. You know, It turned out to be a beautiful tribute and criticism, and have so much depth about so many things. It's funny because it's about someone we would think would be a bad parent, but he tries really hard, and also is haunted. He's a haunted figure, you know, and it becomes hard to raise children. 1959 movie I thought of, Devin and I watched just a couple days ago. It was called 400 Blows from Truffaut. It made me think about parenthood in a similar way, even though that's almost completely from the boy's perspective, where this has a little more of the parent. I feel like that might be an interesting double feature, Honey Boy and 400 Blows. Jim, you've not seen Honey Boy, as I recall.
No, that's the Honey Boy was the number 2 one that I forgot missing.
The other thing I'll say is Honey Boy is kind of a fantasy film about what you'd hope modern mental health care would do for a person when they need it. Through the lens of when a celebrity that has good relationships gets put through mental health care, how that can lead to creatively using it as a story to materially support themselves. I think has a lot of layers to it in an interesting way. And it also just made me very excited to see whatever films come next from Alma Harrell.
How do you feel about my the one quibble that I had is that getting a little overly sentimental at the end?
I felt like it was an earned conclusion and resolution.
And that's very subjective kind of thing. Let's move on to Jim's number 1 film of 2019.
So I guess first of all, Jonathan, I'm sorry. Because my top film of 2019 was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, I hate it. I've said plenty of mean, negative things about it. I really, really hated it. Jim?
I, on the other hand, thought it was an amazing reconstruction of this golden era of Hollywood that sort of was held on a knife edge. And contrary to being destroyed, I thought that the vignettes told us so much about their characters, so much about who they were as people, especially their interactions together and what made them as close as they were. I loved the scenes of being an actor on set. I especially loved the way that he directed the Spahn Ranch scene, one of the best directed horror sequences that I saw this year, where for a little while I really wasn't sure if anyone was safe.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things I mentioned in my complaint to Alex was I did say that the individual scenes were strong in and of themselves usually. It's the overall whole, the meandering and episodic nature of the narrative that I found objectionable.
Those individual scenes tied together the overarching
I agree.
narrative. I didn't think they were disjointed. I thought they actually served a greater purpose.
I thought it was very novel.
I disagree completely, and they serve the purpose of Quentin Tarantino masturbating. Is the purpose I feel like they serve.
Isn't that what every film is for every filmmaker?
I don't.
I don't think so. It's like I had the right idea, just the wrong guy. I mean, I feel like I've liked the films increasingly less with each passing Tarantino film, and so I think the last one I actually liked was Inglourious Basterds, and that was 10 years ago.
So it sounds like you need to make another film. That's the type of film
I'd love to make that happen. Are you guys ready for my number one?
Yes.
All right. At one point in the show, we were going to review this film, but then the scheduling didn't work out. But when it came up, Jim referred to it as high expectation theater on the show in referring to this movie. And if that's the case, this film met my expectations. Ladies and gentlemen, the best film I saw this year, Jim, was
Ad Astra.
Ad Astra. James Gray's Ad Astra. A beautifully complex, compelling, existential, and highly meditative film in the best possible way. Think Hearts of Darkness in space. Gray does a great job with the subdued tone without losing sight of the scope or the mise-en-scène. He also manages to focus on character. We never leave Roy or his inner thoughts. The journey into his space mirrors the journey into his own soul. I normally don't like voiceover. I talk about it all the time in the show, but this film uses it in such an introspective way, never as a crutch to advance the plot. It was about the inner workings of a man's mind. To me, this film is about appreciating our time on Earth and environmentally not relying on Deus Ex Machina to save our species. As the film says very simply and effectively, we're all we've got. I'm remembering now as I'm talking that Jim did mention it, and he was going to talk about it earlier, which only means that is his worst film of the year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Amazing.
In pretty much I because there were, I will say this because I had a little thing prepared for the worst film of the year, and I guess this works as a segue. There were technically and story wise worse films that I saw, and actually I saw one of them with you, Jonathan. That would be The Kitchen, which was a close contender for worst film of the year.
Very bad.
For Ad Astra, I think I had such high hopes for this movie. What I got instead was Brad Pitt's No Good, Very Bad, Horrible Day, where anything that could keep him from completing that journey happened to come up to get in his way. In the exact opposite way that 1917 produced obstacles to the characters that felt well placed and realistic and things that they would actually have to struggle with to get over. Brad Pitt's obstacles felt like if he had left 5 minutes later, it wouldn't have been a problem. They felt completely arbitrary and only served to be a stopping point between him and his end goal. It completely and consistently threw me off, and it was an additive effect. So that by the time we had the spaceship distress signal and that whole sequence, I think I was lost for the movie in that. And what I ended up walking away from was, although I loved Brad Pitt in the movie, and I actually really liked the voiceover, I was so disappointed by it.
It sounds like The Kitchen you're acknowledging is kind of a worse movie, and Ad Astra is the most disappointing.
Yes, but for that reason, like if we want, I don't think it's an objective statement of this is technically the worst movie, because I think you can just count flaws. Subjectively, for me, the worst movie-going experience I had this year was Ad Astra.
And I would argue, I think you missed it. I mean, like, I think it is such an existential film that is so much about humanity and what makes us who we are. I didn't expect it to be the number one when I went to see it, although I've admired James Gray's work. And Alex, you and I reviewed his Two Lovers earlier this same year.
Oh, I agree. That's the same director. Yeah.
Same director. And this is a whole different kind of film. It was such like a magical human experience to me. So it's really, that's just how subjective it is. And I'm disappointed, obviously, Jim, that we're so far off, even though we had 1917, together.
Yeah, that moment. I'm glad that we had that, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, but this is almost embarrassing that because I mean, audiences are going to look at you and say like, well, if it's the worst film, I'm not going to bother with it. So
no, I mean, look, I don't think any of us. I'm sure somebody out there is going to go and listen to us and say, "But I love The Kitchen."
No one's coming to
There might be, whatever.
Like, we can't argue with how a person feels for that.
No,
Like,
of course not. Look, I made that point to Davy Joe like 1,000 times. But I'm just saying, if audiences had to choose who to listen to, they're more likely to listen to you, as since you're the everyman kind of.
Well,
oh, am I the everyman?
none of you even mentioned my bottom three, so that.
Well, not yet, and that's a good segue, Alex. I wasn't going to do worst film of the year till later, but since we're there, why don't you give me your worst film of the year?
I think the worst film of the year was The Lion King.
I'll give you that. It was bad.
I think it was an incredible technical achievement, and just in terms of like pushing our craft forward, I'm really glad it was made. It was ripe with a lot of growing pains. A meandering political message that was so diluted by several writers that it made no sense and was completely disjointed.
Jim, you were nodding when you heard The Lion King.
I totally understand that viewpoint. It is definitely not up there for me.
More diplomatic. In spite of all the films that I watched, and I hadn't, I didn't like The Lion King, but I was worried I didn't have like a really, really bad movie to call the worst of the year. Until this one came late in the viewing process, I got to watch Cold Pursuit, starring Liam Neeson. That took the cake as the worst movie of the year for me. The film raced through its narrative like it had someplace else to be, leaving gaping, completely abandoning character transitions. The plot that we did see was often silly or senseless. The action scenes were okay, but not special and not often enough, since frequently that's what makes these Liam Neeson thrillers more interesting. Worse, the film seemed to take a perverse pleasure in its body count. Nothing in the film felt real. It's as if Liam Neeson and director Hans-Petter Moland didn't take the world of the film seriously, or worse, weren't even able to tell the difference of what felt honest and what didn't. I don't suppose anybody's ever seen Cold Pursuit.
I have not, but I want to now.
Yeah, and seriously, I feel that, and probably like, what is it? London is Falling. Is that the other one?
I haven't seen any of those movies, so I didn't watch. It's Angel Has Fallen or something.
I'm sorry, London is Falling was the sequel.
Angel is the third one. Angel Has Fallen, I think. Olympus Has Fallen, I think, is the first one. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually saw that one.
Okay.
That was awful. I mean, that was
all right.
Low expectation cinema.
All right, guys. So it's time to close things out. I wanted to get your feedback. How do you guys feel about the evening? The top 10s overall. A lot of disagreement. You guys had a lot of agreement. I think I had one film I shared with Alex and one film I shared with Jim. How do you guys feel?
Well, I feel like after this discussion, I have 15 more films from 2019 that I really want to watch.
What's number one? What are you going to first?
I don't have them in a rank order yet.
I just thought it'd be fun if you're like, Jim's description of this film made me want to watch it most. I wasn't sure if that was a thing.
The Farewell, the discussion we had about it made me want to watch that. And then Judy sounds interesting. And then one that I've been interested to see for a while is Ford versus Ferrari.
Oh, yeah. And Judy didn't make my list, but I just brought it up as an example. Jim, what do you think about tonight?
I'll tell you, the one movie I was expecting to hear a movie, and the movie that none of us talked about was The Irishman. True story. When I watched The Irishman, I started it at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I finished it at 11:45 p.m. the same day.
I don't think Alex has seen Irishman. Have you?
I didn't. Scorsese kind of lost me when he made The Silence.
Davy's number one film of 2016 and my number two film of 2016.
Yeah, which I just thought was like Christian imperialist, xenophobic garbage.
I don't think it argued for the treatment of the Japanese people. I don't think it was condoning that behavior.
No, it was in some ways lionizing these missionaries who the real purpose of their mission, even if they were unwitting to it, was pretty insidious.
I agree with that, but I think it was more about a question of, I think it was a movie about faith to me and the challenges to our faith, because I feel like the missionary goes through a journey and
I just don't think that you should work out your existential spiritual problems on another country.
And I think the filmmakers and eventually Andrew Garfield's character in that movie would agree with that. But that's beside the point. Irishman, to answer Jim's question, I thought was fine. It was like okay, probably fourth or fifth favorite of the Oscar Best Picture nominees. Like I don't think it was very special at all. I think it was well-tread territory for Scorsese, and this one wasn't any more interesting or better.
Yeah, that's kind of it. I got done with the movie and I felt like I had seen, I'd watched that movie, specifically that Scorsese movie, several times already.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. See, here we're in agreement, Jonathan.
Look at that. Every once in a while. And we agree about Ready or Not too, even though, to some degree. So, but wow, we were way off in terms of my number one film of the year. Way off. So it's funny because we'll see tomorrow night, but I have a feeling, and tune in tomorrow night, Jim, to see. I have a feeling Devin will also have Ad Astra as his number one film of the year.
All right.
So we will find out. All right. So guys, here is what we got coming up for the rest of the week. We have tomorrow night is our Oscar preview with Devin and George. Some of the films we talked about tonight are Oscar nominees. Most are not. Check out what we choose amongst this year's nominees, and we're going to predict who wins, what we think should win, and what we think should have been nominated. And the big show of the year coming up this Thursday night, February 6th, is our 1959 in review, in which we're going to go over several of the Oscar categories of 1959 and look back 60 years at that year in cinema and culture. So, guys, with that said, I will see you tomorrow night. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for listening or watching.
I'll see you tomorrow at the Oscar preview. Have a good evening.